by the rivers of Babylon. Yeah, we sat down and we cried when we remembered Jerusalem. We were sick, Lord, near to dying. Oh,
Shalom, shalom, family, and welcome to another Bible study. My name is Azeret, one of the teachers of Congregation BINAH, CHOKMAH, located in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York, giving all honor, glory, and praise to the Most High God, King of the universe, for life, food, clothing, and shelter, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. We could be heard well in the room. Please give us a 1. Please give us a 1. Giving all honor, glory, and praise to the Most High God. Sorry for our late start today. You know, we start late sometimes. I had a little time run over with a pre-recorded show that I did. So thank you all for joining us, praying that the Creator of heaven and earth will continue to watch, guide, and protect us, that He will watch over His people, Yisrael, scattered in the four corners of the earth, that He will protect us from all harm seen and unseen, that He will continue to bless all of us, wherever we might be, scattered in the four corners of the earth. I pray that the Creator of heaven and earth will continue to bless and protect us and keep us and allow us to grow as His people, even in these places where we are held captive. Praying that the Most High God be with the sick, with the fatherless, with the widow, with the downtrodden, with the orphan. Praying that the Most High God continue to bless all of those who need His blessing, those who are sick. We pray that the Most High God bestow the blessings of heaven upon us, even during this season, during this time of Booth, this festival of Booths. That's a remembrance for us, being our ancestors being in the wilderness, and for us to remember the time that they spent out there and dwelling in booths. So I pray that the Most High God, Creator of heaven and earth, will continue to guide, bless, and protect us, that He'll continue to watch over us and bestow His blessing upon His children, Yisrael. Hallelujah. Once again, giving all honor, glory, and praise to the Most High God, thanking Him for allowing us all to return here today. And it's a blessing to be here today with all of you. So today we'll be going into Shimini Azeret. Shimini Azeret, which is the 8th day Solemn Assembly. And for that, I'll turn it over to my brother, Binyamin. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing good. I'm giving praise and honor to the Most High. Hopefully you're doing well, along with everybody that's out there listening this day. As we are in the middle of, as we just mentioned, a festival season. We spoke about it last week, about Sukkot, the Festival of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, various translations or iterations of the name or the description of it. And we are coming to the close of the festival, and beginning tomorrow night, or beginning on October 13th at evening, we'll begin Shimini Azeret. So that's the subject that we'll be speaking about today, the 8th day of Solemn Assembly, as it is often translated. So that's for this 2025 calendar year, from Monday evening the 13th, or October 13th in the evening, up until October 14th in the evening, for this calendar year 2025. So that is when Shimini Azeret will be taking place, which is a holy day, as we'll be describing just now. There are not too many passages in the Holy Scriptures that speak about it, so our discussion of it should be or could be very short. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards, and comments from everybody, and then we go forth from there. So we encourage everybody to like the video, also subscribe to the channel, invite your family and your friends to join on this weekly Bible study on this channel, every Sunday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. So again, subscribe so you can participate in the conversation week by week. Also give forth your suggestions for topics in the future, and also questions that you may have that we can answer in an expanded level in the future. So again, we'll be talking about Shimini Azeret, two topics that are still lingering that I was reminded to mention, because we tried to cover some of the topics that people have been asking, throughout the year up until this point. So one of them, or two of them, in regards to birthdays, and the other one in regards to the Star of David. So we will have those discussions in the future. For those that have information on either or both of those subjects, just feel free to email us info@dcb.org with your information, any research that you may have on either or both of those subjects. Again, that being celebrating birthdays and the usage of the Star of David, or the history of the Star of David, so that we can get to those discussions as well. Those are two lingering discussions. We do believe that we've covered a lot of the other subjects that people have had. Throughout the years, we've had the Bible study, but those are the two lingering ones at this moment. So as we are beginning to talk about Shimini Azeret, we read about that first read about that in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23. And that chapter, as we've been going over it the past few weeks, is the chapter that details the appointed seasons of Jehovah God. So it starts off by saying, Leviticus chapter 23, and Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, The appointed seasons of Jehovah, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my appointed seasons. And then it continues on saying, 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no manner of work. It is a Sabbath unto Jehovah in all your dwellings. So the chapter, as we have been going over the past few weeks, and just going over detail by detail, because we've, the past few weeks on the Bible study, and also the past few weeks overall, have been packed with these holy convocations that were mentioned within this chapter, all detailed within the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar. The children of Israel received, were told by God that the month that they came out of Egypt would be the beginning of months unto them. So that month, which is called Abib, is the first month on the Hebrew calendar, or the first month on the calendar that the children of Israel were following. And in regards to the calendar overall, or the usage of a calendar in ancient times, not just instituted by the children of Israel, but ancient societies utilized a lunar cycle for their months. So the beginning of a month was marked by a new moon. So every time a new moon came around was the beginning of a month. The Hebrew calendar specifically is a lunar solar calendar, meaning that it does follow the same pattern of a new moon beginning in the month, but it also has to fall in line with a solar year. So it's a conjunction of a lunar calendar and a solar calendar together. That's how everything is kept in the appointed seasons, as you read throughout this chapter, Leviticus chapter 23. But the first day that was spoken about in this chapter is the Sabbath day, which appears, of course, at the end of every week. So every 7th day, there is this holy day or holy convocation in which no manner of work is done. And we are constantly reminded of this, and we remind ourselves of it so that we know that this is a very important day. It reminds us that, the Sabbath day reminds us that it was only one God that created the heavens and the earth. We read about that in the book of Genesis, created everything in 6 days. And on the 7th day, ceased from all work, blessed the 7th day, and made it holy. And therefore, as a reminder, week by week, we observe this by not doing any work whatsoever, as opposed to the other holy convocations that we read about in this chapter, where some work is allowed. Then in verse 4, it continues saying, these are the appointed seasons of Yahweh, even holy convocations which you shall proclaim in their appointed seasons. And so it started off talking about there are going to be appointed seasons mentioned. It spoke about the Sabbath day. Then it repeats the statement from the beginning of the chapter in verse 4 before detailing the other appointed seasons that are to be observed. And as you'll stop it for a moment, as we always mention, almost every week, as you hear us reading in the scripture and we mention the name of God in the appropriate places, many, as you will see on your screen, your English translations have the words the Lord, but we mention the name of God so that we can know the God that we're speaking about and the God that's speaking to us. So we pronounce his name as Yahweh. Many people pronounce his name as Yahweh. And that comes from the Hebrew text. The majority of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. So those places where they translate or they have the words the Lord, but Lord being in capital letters or just a capital L, in the Hebrew text, that is where you would see the name of God. And in Hebrew, those consonants are Yod, He, Waw, He, corresponding to the English consonants YH and WH. So just giving a little background, so as people are hearing us, mention the name of God or pronounce the name of God, they will understand, or hopefully understand, why we do so. So we're jumping down to, we're going to go a little bit further, but in verse 23, because in the beginning of this particular month in the Hebrew calendar, it started off with a day called Yom Teruah, which we spoke about at that time, or the day of the horn blast, or the day of the blowing of the horn. So when it says in verse 23, and Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, shall be a solemn rest unto you, a memorial proclaimed with the blast of horns, a holy convocation. So we're not going to go into detail about this this day. We spoke about that 2 weeks ago when it actually occurred, or right before it occurred. But just wanted to speak about the 7th month and the amount of holy convocations that occurred within this month. And then in verse 27, it said, howbeit on the 10th day of the 7th month, the day of atonement, there shall be a holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and you shall bring an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So the first day of the 7th month was a holy convocation. The 10th day of the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar was a holy convocation, or is, because in the future, it will continue to be a holy convocation. And then in verse 33, it says, and Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of this 7th month is the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto Yahweh. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no manner of servile work. So that is what we spoke about during our last Bible study, the beginning of the Feast of Booths. You shall bring an offering made by fire unto Jehovah. It is a day of solemn assembly. You shall do no manner of servile work. So that's the day that we're speaking about right now. So it doesn't, as opposed to saying the 22nd day of the 7th month is a holy convocation, it appends this 8th day after the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. So you would have, so that you actually have the Feast of Booths, so the Feast of Tabernacles taking place for 7 days. Then the 8th day, so it makes it seem, or it gives the connotation that there is a connection with this 8th day to the 7-day festival. But we saw earlier, as we read, that the festival itself, the Festival of Booths, is only a 7-day celebration. So the children of Israel are supposed to dwell in booths for 7 days. And then now this 8th day is appended as a holy convocation, a day to stop all servile work and to acknowledge that the entire day is holy. And it's a day that basically closes out the entire season. But it's not a day where dwelling in booths is required, because that was for the previous 7 days. But now you have this 8th day, and it's just thrown in there. So that's why, we are speaking about other things today. But the conversation on this 8th day of solemn assembly is actually very brief. So we do have to remember that as we observe the other holy convocations, we also acknowledge this 8th day of solemn assembly. So you'll hear the term Shimini Azeret, Shimini being 8th. And then you have this word Azeret, which means assembly, or as it says, you see here, assembly, solemn assembly, or assembly, sacred or festive meeting, or assemblage, or company, or group. So this is a day for gathering. That is basically what this day is for. It is a holy day. So, and as I mentioned, no servile work is to be done. So this is not a day where we do any of our occupational work. As it says, no servile work. So that would also include any school work, any of your personal trades, any personal work that you have for yourself or around the house, any major household chores or renovations and things like that are not to be done on this 8th day of solemn assembly. This is a day, as it says, no servile work. So the same description that we had for Yom Teruah, the same description that we have for the first and last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the same description that we have for the Feast of Weeks, it's the same description we have for this 8th day of solemn assembly. So we have to acknowledge that this day is a holy day that is coming up. Then it says in verse 37, these are the appointed seasons of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, to bring an offering made by fire unto Yahweh, a burnt offering and a meal offering, a sacrifice and drink offerings, each on its own day. So this comes to the conclusion of talking about all of the holy seasons, or all of the appointed seasons within the year. But we are in the 7th month on the the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, and therefore, as we are still in this festival of booths, during these 7 days, we just have to remember that the 8th day, which is coming up, is a holy convocation. The other place that we read about this 8th day of solemn assembly is in the book of Numbers, chapter 29. And chapters 28 and 29 of Numbers, as we read in Leviticus 23, it mentioned that offerings are also supposed to be done on these days. That these 2 chapters detail the exact offerings that are to be done on these days. But for the purpose of just reiterating the holiness of this day, we're in Numbers chapter 29 and just reading starting from verse 35, where it says, on the 8th day, you shall have a solemn assembly, you shall do no manner of servile work. So this is the way you get the term Shimini, as we mentioned earlier, means 8th. And then you have Azeret, might be going a little fast, but Azeret again is assembly. So Shimini is the 8th assembly, or basically, if you read an entire phrase where it says, Bayom Hashmini Azeret, on the 8th day of assembly. So Shimini Azeret is, even though we translated just to have it make sense in English, we say the 8th day of solemn assembly. Shimini Azeret should actually start off with saying Yom Shimini Azeret to get the full translation of it, because the word Yom in Hebrew means day. It continues saying, and you shall present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire of a sweet savour unto Jehovah, 1 bullock, 1 ram, 7 he lambs of the first year without blemish. Their meal offerings and their drink offerings for the bullock, for the ram, and for the lamb shall be according to their number after their ordinance. And 1 he goat for a sin offering beside the continual burnt offering and the meal offering thereof, and the drink offering thereof. And then it says, these ye shall offer unto Jehovah in your appointed seasons beside your vows and your freewill offerings, whether they be your burnt offerings or your meal offerings or your drink offerings or your peace offerings. Now, of course, we know offerings cannot be observed today because of the time that we're living in and the locations that we are living in, because offerings could only be presented at the place that Jehovah God has chosen for his name to be called, and also be performed by the priests out of the sons of Aaron. Aaron, who was Moses' brother, and Aaron was the first high priest. And through him, you have the priesthood that was established among the children of Israel, that Jehovah God said that they only could perform the offerings. But even without offerings, these holy convocations are still holy. So whenever these particular dates appear in their appointed seasons, they have to be observed as holy, and we have to acknowledge them as such. So that comes to the conclusion of our brief discussion on Shimini Azeret, or Yom Shimini Azeret, the 8th day of Solemn Assembly, as it doesn't give a reason. Most of the holy convocations have a reason behind it, but for this 8th day of Solemn Assembly, a reason is not given, so we could just think of it as a close to the season of the Festival of Booths. It's not exactly part of it, but it brings the close, brings a closure to this season. So we're gonna allow time for questions and comments from those that are out there that may have any. So for that, I'll allow Chief Uziel to moderate this portion of our discussion.
Hallelujah. Torah by Rabbi Chief Binyamin, and thank you all for joining us. Rabbi, can you give the connection between this holy season, Sukkot, and also during the time of the Hanukkah?
So for Hanukkah, which is going to come up in another 2 months, is an 8th day celebration, which is, and we'll actually go over it, of course, in detail when it comes around again. But it's an 8th day celebration that you read about in the book of Maccabees, which is today found amongst the collection of the books in the Apocrypha. So this is the time of the Syrian Greeks being in control of the territory, which included the land of Israel, where the children of Israel were, or in the territory of Judah, more specifically, were during this time. And you had Antiochus V, who was, Antiochus IV, who was the reigning king of the Syrian Greeks at this time. And he had the temple of the house of God desecrated. And then you had a group which was led by Judah Maccabee, and of course that's where you get the term the Maccabees, where there was a revolution taking place within the territory with the goal of entering into Jerusalem, reclaiming Jerusalem from the Syrian Greeks, and also cleansing the house of God. So they had a cleansing of the house of God during that time, and they marked that cleansing of the house of God by an 8th day celebration, which we know is Hanukkah today, or which is a translation of dedication, because that's where they dedicated the house of God, or rededicated the house of God during that time. So it is an 8th day celebration, and it's akin to the Feast of Booths, also being, well, not also being, but being a 7-day celebration, but having the 8th day appended to it, and therefore you have 8 days to really celebrate. So the connection would be in the amount of days that the celebrations take place for both. The only difference is that for Sukkot, the first day is holy, and then the 8th day is holy, where Hanukkah is not holy season. But also they were, even during that time, because of the desecration of the house of God and the scattering of the children of Israel throughout the territory of Judah, festivals such as, of course, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and definitely the Feast of Booths, were not able, they were not able to observe them properly. So now when you think about the 9th month in the Hebrew calendar, during this year where they were able to rededicate the house of God, they had just previously missed another festival of Booths. So having a celebration is not necessarily a replacement of the Feast of Booths, but it's an opportunity where they were able to have an 8th day celebration in rededicating the house of God, and also acknowledging that they had previously missed out on the Feast of Booths for another time. So the connection would be in the amount of days that take place for both, and the closest in the time of the year in the Hebrew calendar that takes place for both, and the opportunity for the children of Israel to rededicate themselves. Also, when we read in the book of 1 Kings, when Solomon built the house for the first time, he built the house of God. When the house of God was built initially, the dedication of the house, when you read it, is or was during the Feast of Booths. It doesn't mention it specifically, But when you read about it taking place in the seventh month, which is called Etanim, that's the name of the seventh month at that time, you read about the celebration of a 7-day festival of that month, which we know is going to be Sukkot. So therefore, the dedication of the house of God took place during Sukkot. So when you have a rededication of the house of God during the time of the Maccabees in the 9th month, they also did a 8-day celebration. So there's, some connections, historically between the two seasons, even, looking at it from that point of view.
Torah, Rabbi. Yeah, because when you read in the story of the Maccabees or on the Apocrypha, you see that they had just missed the like you explained, the holy season of Sukkot and also Shimini Azeret. So yeah, that's what I was looking for, to give people a broader understanding of why Hanukkah is 8 days and why it's celebrated for 8 days, because they had just missed Sukkot and Shemini Azeret. So the rededication comes in the, rededicating themselves, I guess you could look at it, to the worship and the service of the Most High God, right? So that's why some of us in certain pockets of Israel do observe Hanukkah, knowing that that's not a holy day that the Most High God appointed, but we know that it was a time where our ancestors rededicated temples that Solomon built, and also they rededicated. You could look at it in sorts of rededicating their spirits, to doing the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High God, which was almost impossible for them to do during that overtaking. So Todah, Rabbi. So let's get to some of these questions. Can you, is it difficult, almost impossible for Hebrew Israelites, Jews, to get jobs that give them all these feast days, Jewish holidays off, including Shabbat?
That depends on where you live. If you live in cities or states that have large Jewish communities, it may tend to be a little bit easier. And I'm, just referencing this, the United States overall for this question, because of course this question can be answered differently in different locations. But the United States, which follow of course, the U.S. Constitution, which includes the freedom of religion, it does give provision for people to celebrate, whatever their quote unquote religion is. It just may be more difficult in other places, but overall, it can be done. So taking the Sabbath day, if you're stating it's based on your religion, can be done. The same thing with all of the appointed seasons that we read about in Leviticus chapter 23. If you stated with your job that this is part of your religion, then getting those days off can be done. But again, it may be more difficult, not impossible, because it has to be provided to you no matter what, based on the Constitution. It has to be provided. But they're just going to be different avenues or different channels that you're going to have to take based on your employer, and also based on state rules or city rules. And so it's not necessarily, we don't want to focus it strictly on how Jewish people observe. As mentioned, it does make it a little bit easier where there are Jewish communities or certain cities or certain states, because employers, may recognize that religion, quote unquote, that religion more easily, and then give providence for those days off. But it's not impossible, because it has to be provided. Now, in other countries, the answer would be different, because each country is going to have its own constitution, or it's basically its own constitution that they're going to be run by. So again, just answering that question based on the United States and how things run in the U.S.
If I may add to that, I believe that any federal job that you have, despite of where you live, has to honor that. The problem a lot of times that people don't fight for their rights. I know several people that work for the post office that live in other states where local supervisors might not understand basically constitution and rules, but they get in a lot of trouble for trying to deny people who are Sabbath observants they days off. But once it gets to a point where you push, it, like the rabbi said, it depends on how much dedication you have. If you get yourself a lawyer and you push certain things and you go to certain lengths, you will get what's right, what's your right, according to the Constitution of the United States of America. Especially if you're an American citizen or a resident and you're working here, any federal job has to honor the Constitution, because all federal jobs fall under the Constitution of the United States of America. You also have big chains companies like, for example, like an Amazon and places like that they have higher ups and they got HR that you could bring your grievances to, that you cannot be discriminated upon because of your, or Starbucks, you cannot be discriminated about because of your religion, your, what they say today, your sexual, all that stuff, whether you, all those things, they cannot be discriminated. So mainly the religion, so just keep that in mind whenever you go. Don't give up whenever it comes to having to get these jobs, and especially if you have a federal job or you work for one of these big chain stores, Walmart, places like that. Also, if you fight, sometimes you gotta fight a little bit more in order to get your way. So let's see here. Yelita Moore, Shalom. My son-in-law told me his Jewish boss asked him what Orthodox rabbi ordained him. Hold on. Shalom. My son-in-law told me his Jewish boss asked him what Orthodox rabbi ordained him, I guess she's trying to say, because he told him he was a Hebrew Israelite and he followed Torah. I told him he said it's his birthright. I guess that's more of a statement. That's not a question.
Yeah, because you don't need to be ordained in order to keep Torah.
That was a comment. Yeah, it was a comment. Question, Rob and Unc. Why do you think the number of bulls decrease each day, Numbers 29? I guess during the time of Sukkot, yeah.
Yeah, it starts off the first day as 13, and then diminishes by 1. So there's no explanation given for that. There are interpretations, because when you add up the amount of bulls for those 7 days, just to give a Judaic interpretation, it adds up to 70, and therefore people say it represents the 70 nations as listed in the Holy Scriptures. As you read in Genesis chapter 10, people say that there are 70 nations that exist in the world based on that. So based on the 70 nations, the 70 bulls, also in the book of Zechariah, where it says that all nations have to, or in the future, will have to observe the Feast of Booths. There's a Jewish or Judaic interpretation that is 70 bulls to represent those 70 nations. Of course, just giving you an interpretation that is definitely not written in the scripture. But, for certain questions, just so because some people may know of certain interpretations, just giving it that. But literally, there's no reason given why it was diminished 1 bull per day. It's just something that God specified, and that's just what it is.
Hallelujah. Let me see here. Why do you think there was a daily sin offering? Numbers 29. Yom Kippur just passed.
As a nation and as individuals, we sin throughout the year. So there is a continual sin offering that's given. There's sin offerings that are given also for certain things that take place just even humanly. Like when you read about a woman after childbirth, she also gives a sin offering. So there is sin offerings that are just, I don't want to use the word random, but there were times that sin offerings are just given, and we don't get an exact explanation of what sin was performed, but the sin offerings are performed. Even like for the Day of Atonement, the priest have to give a sin offering on behalf of himself and his household. It doesn't specify what sins may have been done, but there were just times where people have to give sin offerings for certain events that take place, and definitely every day, or specifically during the Holy Convocation days, and also throughout the Feast of Booths, even throughout the days that the intermediate days that they would call them, sin offerings are still performed. So short answer is that there's no explanation given for the sins that they are for, but God specifies that they have to be done.
Question from JDM. Where did the tradition come from of the Torah reading cycle on the 8th day?
The Torah reading cycle on the 8th
day? I think
you
on
mean
Shimini Azeret, they read with Zohar Braka, I believe.
Right. The ending of the Torah cycle.
Yeah,
right.
The ending of the Torah cycle.
The Torah cycle is on the 8th day. I would have to look that up to specifically get that answer. But also, when we read in even the portion that YAH, God told Moses to tell the children of Israel that every 7th year during the Feast of Booths, that the Torah was supposed to be read in its entirety. And then when you look at the cycle of the Torah reading, it completes or it ends
right
during the well, technically, of course, the 8th day is not part of the Feast of Booths, but it ends on the 8th day of solemn assembly. And now today, amongst the Judaic world, those that are living in the land of Israel, or speaking specifically about the Israelis or Jewish people living in Israel, they're only going to keep one day, Shimini Azeret. Outside of the land, you get this additional day called Simchat Torah, where is outside of the land, the reading of Wazot HaBraka, or the conclusion of the Torah cycle is read. Just putting everything in perspective. So as opposed to, and it's not a replacement of, but as opposed to the reading of the entire Torah every 7th year during the Feast of Booths, you have this yearly Torah cycle, which ends during the Feast of Booths. It gives an opportunity for people to hear the Torah read Sabbath after Sabbath all throughout the year, completing with its completion during the Feast of Booths. So that's just one connection that you can look at for it to be made. But in terms of the time frame, specifically where it was decided to do it that way, I would have to get more research on that. But just wanted people to go back into Deuteronomy chapter 31, and you'll see where God said that the Torah has to be read in its entirety every 7th year during the Feast of Booths.
I mean, that's interesting because it does make sense. And I believe during Simchat Torah, they read with Zohar Braka and they read part of Bereshit, so that the cycle of the Torah is never broken. Reading the Torah, I believe that was explained to me before.
Yeah, you end, and then you start right back up.
Right back. Like I don't know if they read the first chapter in Genesis or
it's
verses.
The first chapter, and well, basically the 7 days of creation. So you'll have up to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3.
Gotcha.
Somewhere around there.
Let me see here. Where did the tradition come from? Things they don't discuss in church. Since there is no temple standing, does the Torah say what should be done during the feast days in place of sacrifices, offerings commanded?
No, we just can't do the offerings, but we still can keep the days holy, but there's nothing that could be done to replace the offerings.
All right. Next question from Yalita Moore. Shalom. So is Hanukkah a commandment or tradition?
It's a tradition and not a commandment. Even in the book of Maccabees itself, we don't read where God speaks.
Right.
So you have traditions such as Hanukkah, you have traditions such as Purim, which were instituted based on deliverances. And both books, the book of Maccabees and the book of Esther, where you read about Purim, you don't read about God speaking to the children of Israel, but they acknowledge that during both of those times, both of those seasons, that there was a deliverance that came from God for the children of Israel. So they instituted the tradition of Hanukkah and the tradition of Purim. So the same thing that, people do today. People may have a situation that they have gone through that they acknowledge that God brought them through, and then year by year, as a testimony, and to acknowledge God during those seasons in their lives individually, or maybe it's a family, or maybe it's a congregation, that people have traditions to mark, certain things that happen in their lives.
JDM question, Rob and Unc. How do you think was a people qualify our part of 2 Chronicles 7:14? Hold on, let me read that. Rob and Unc, how do you think we as a people qualify our part of 2 Chronicles 7:14? I wonder if our crying isn't heard because our punishment isn't over. I appreciate you and your insight.
We'll go to 2 Chronicles 7:14.
Yeah.
Which states, if my people, and this is the prayer, part of the prayer of Solomon when he dedicated the house of God. Actually, we start from 13. If I shut up heaven, that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people upon whom my name is called shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evils, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now mine eyes shall be open and my ears attent unto the prayer that is made in this place. For now I have chosen and hallowed this house, that my name may be there forever, and my eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. So this is actually the response of God after Solomon made the prayer at the dedication of the house of God. And this is also, just as a side note before continuing, this is the reason why many people would face the direction of the house of God. You will hear people say, facing the east, especially, of course, if you're living in the United States or in the Caribbean or South America, you're facing the east, you're basically facing the direction of the house of God, because God, in his response to what Solomon said in his prayer, is he asked God that if the people are in captivity and they face this house and make their prayer, make their petition, that God will hear. So God is affirming that he heard the prayer, that he's answering it. So specifically in verse 14, if my people upon whom my name is called shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. So this is the response of God, and this is the thing that we have to do today. That of us that acknowledge that we are the children of Israel, that we have to, this is the procedure. And once God speaks it, it's going to be done. So we humble ourselves and pray, seek God's face and turn away from our evil ways, then he will hear. So the reason because there's no time frame given for the current captivity of the children of Israel. For Babylon, we read about 7, we read it was going to be 70 years. When it came to Egypt, we read 400 years. That's going to be some discrepancy in terms of the exact 400 years, but God told Abraham 400 years when it came to Egypt. But when it came to the current dispersion of the children of Israel, there's no time frame given. So this is the answer in terms of the time frame of the children of Israel in the current captivity, that the children of Israel have to be humble, turn away from the evil ways, seek the face of God so that he will hear our prayer, forgive us, and then heal the land and return us to the land. So in regards to the question specifically that was asked, this is basically the formula that has to be performed so that God can hear us. Again, there's no specific time frame that was given for our come dispersion. So it's not for us to say that the time is up, but the time will be up once we do what it says here exactly in verse 14.
Let me see here. I think this statement right here is good from Labia Yisrael. It was good seeing you yesterday, sis. She came and visited us. One of our online members came to D.C.B. and was there in the building with us at the first half. So, Labia Yisrael says, Shalom. I just started another job, and when I went to the interview, I took the letter from D.C.B. I told them I must have Shabbat and other holy days off. They still hired me. I do have to use my PTO. And that's what happened with most private entities, that you have to use your PTO. But most jobs I had has honored my beliefs. Like Chief said, we just have to fight for our rights. It wasn't always easy for me to do that, but now I do. Praise Yah. And that's it in a nutshell right there. You have to fight for your rights. Z. Binyamin wrote, also speak with your HR reps. Do not go to the immediate supervisors. They may not know all the policies, may be able to use religious exemption or put in for it. So there you have it. Yes, that's what happens with a lot of supervisors. They do not know policy, and that's why a lot of them get laid off, because they don't know policy and they violate people's rights, and they get laid off. Sometimes when you see that supervisor just leaves abruptly, it's because they're violating people policy, and when you violate policy, you cost the company money, lawsuits, and things of that nature. So it's very important to know your policy when you do your trainings, when you do all of your, most companies have these trainings that you do on computers, and that's when you get to find out most of the policies of the companies. And yeah, that's how you go about doing your thing. Hey, okay, you want this is what your policy says, that I cannot be discriminated because of religious, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. So if he's giving you a hard time because of your religion, after you bring a letter that says that you're a Sabbath observer from a religious organization, quote unquote religious organization, then they are in violation of company policy, which could cost the company money, because then the next action, if you want to go all the way through, is go get a lawyer and sue the company, because the policies of the company, you are being, sometimes people retaliate, they do whatever it is that they do, and boom, that's how it goes. So let's see here. Did you know that some workplaces have to provide a nursing room for nursing mothers according to the law? Okay, that's new, but hey. So that's it for the questions, Rabbi. I think we have a short day today. You got anything to say in conclusion?
No, just thanking the Most High for our lives, allowing us to reach this season, hoping everybody continues to enjoy this season, that the Most High will bring us through, and hopefully we'll get to experience the Feast of Booths in the land of Israel in the future, where we'll see it as it was written in Zechariah chapter 14. But just as a reminder, our discussion today was about Shimini at Azeret, so just remember that tomorrow evening, Monday evening, October 13th in the evening to October 14th in the evening is a holy day. So if you haven't done so already, just make preparation to be off from work or from school, and to prepare your home so you don't have much work to do in the house as well. So just be aware of the holy day that is coming up.
All right. Things they don't discuss in church is always the last minute he throws something out. But let me ask this question. Things they don't discuss in church. Can Torah keepers make conscientious exemptions to the Torah holy days and Shabbat, depending on their jobs, i.e. hospital, lodging, etc.?
In terms of Torah itself, we can't exempt ourselves from any aspect of Torah, including the holy days. So as some of the people were asking questions, and as the answers were put out there from Chief Uziel and many others, it may be difficult to do certain things, but it can be done. So as we would also stated, God is looking at us to see how much of an effort we're making to keep his holy days that he has specified. We read in scripture, as we was also speaking about the Maccabees earlier, we read that even during that time, the great lengths that people had to take in order to keep the Sabbath day, holy. Or so you would see a lot of quote unquote work being done in order to not do any work. So we're not living in a time where people are put to death for being Sabbath observers, but livelihoods are put at stake, and therefore God is looking at our attempts to keep these days that he has given us. So in the end, there's going to be a great reward. Of course, it's going to be some work to get to it or get through it for certain people. But just think about what's going to happen at the end, and how much God will bless you for doing so. So, some people may end up not being at that job anymore and end up getting something better in life. But, God just wants to see people make that effort. And, some people go from being employees to being employers, doing things such as this, or hit it big, some other way that, God blesses them to where they don't need anybody else. Or, we all depend on our sustenance from God overall. But, where we have to depend on people on a human level for things, God shows us that, as long as we push through certain things, that he will take care of us in the end.
And I think what he was asking is like, he might have phrased the question maybe a little bit wrong, because if a baby is born on the Shabbat, it's going to be delivered. Like you can't, those are things you cannot help, right? So if a baby's born, the doula, or the what do they call it? The midwives or whatever, they're gonna deliver the baby. The doctor's gonna deliver the baby. If a male child is born on the 8th day, he's gonna be and the 8th day and if he's born on the Shabbat day, the 8th day is gonna fall on the Shabbat day. He's gonna be circumcised on the Shabbat day. That's just Torah, right? So we don't look at that as being an exemption, but that's just being Torah. Like he said, get knowledge, get wisdom, but above all you're get understanding. You're not gonna, if you're feeling ill, if you have asthma, you're gonna go and get the treatment that you need for the asthma, because it says better is a living dog than a dead lion. What use are you dead, right? So the Most High God tell us to deal with wisdom. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit better, Brother Ricardo, but that's those are the simple answers we could come up with. Rabbi, you got anything to add to that?
Yes, in terms of medical stuff specifically, those wouldn't fall into the category of work. Those are just, life events that take place. So, so as you said, they're not exemptions, so to speak.
Right.
They're just things that happen, and they wouldn't be considered work, regardless.
Right. Yeah, if the babies are born, they don't control when they bowel movements are. So you got to change Pampers. You got to, you got to feed. You got to do all these things. You know what I'm saying? So those are things that are understood. You're not doing any kind of work per se. That's just life. I don't know if that answered your question, Brother Ricardo, but yes. So thank you all once again for joining us. Someone said last week, you said don't take medicine on a fast or holy day on Yom Kippur, I guess. I don't think that's what you specifically said, but you want to.
Yeah. So when it comes to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the primary thing to do is to consult your doctor and see, because every chronic condition is different, for different people. So that answer is best for your primary care physician. What was said was, be cautious about taking it versus not taking it. Also consider, being able to, of course, consult with your doctor. Whatever medication that is required, taking it, right before the Day of Atonement and having it on hand for right after the Day of Atonement, if that's possible. But of course, all of that will be specified by a doctor. And, part of the answer was also, sometimes even with chronic conditions, there are medications, and it's just like with eating. Sometimes people forget to take certain things or eat certain things, and we end up surviving. So the answer to that question wasn't just a blanket don't take it, but just consider all of the ramifications around it. But of course, consulting a doctor, seeing if your doctor would say it's okay for you. But of course, the answer is definitely up to the individual themselves, knowing how much they can bear, how much they can take. But the reference was also made that, some people, whether purposely or by forgetting, skip some of their chronic medications and end up being okay anyway. So that's not an excuse not to take it for the Day of Atonement if it's necessary. But, those are just some of the things to consider when, those type of questions come up. But again, the final answer would be on you. And right before that, your doctor, but ultimately your connection with God.
Yosef Ben, Shalom, can you stretch or exercise on Shabbat? Definitely can't exercise on Shabbat. You might get up.
It sounds like you said can.
Yeah, you might get up and maybe your back was a little bit tight or something on the Shabbat, and you might stretch out to like touch your toes or something like that. Like that most people do. They get up, they stretch, like touch their toes. That wouldn't be considered exercise. You're trying to get the kinks out your body. But to go on a 5-mile jog is definitely low toe, to pick up weights and to do all that. Yeah, that's a total rest. I don't know if Rabbi, you want to touch on that.
No, I just wanted to make sure that it was clear what you were saying. So like if you're stretching because you feel something at the moment,
right,
as we were speaking about other medical things or the physical things that happen, people are going to stretch when they feel certain things. But if you're not feeling anything and you decide to go through a stretching regimen, then that wouldn't be something to do on the Sabbath day. Not doing, Pilates and,
right,
lack of a better term, yoga, as we spoke about it a few weeks ago.
right,
And other, stretching regimens are, Tai Chi and Tai Bo and all those things you cannot do on the Sabbath day. So just think of the Sabbath day as a day just to do nothing. That's just basically what it is. It's a day for us to do nothing. We go forth, if you have a congregation you can go to, you go forth and worship and rejoice in the house of God, or, in today's time, if you can watch something online, you do so. But basically, God gave it as a day to do nothing. So, day can go by very quick, but it's just a day for us to rest our minds and our body.
Also, very interesting. What about, they got like these massage chairs and they got like these these foot massages. You just put your feet in it, you click the button, or massage chair. Would that be low for on the Shabbat day, or you could sit in your massage chair and hit the button?
So for that, I'm just going to give my answer. I'm not going to give a definitive answer because there's nothing probably in Torah to relate to that specifically.
Right.
But my answer would be no.
Okay.
But like I said, there's nothing I can point to in Torah.
Gotcha.
In regard to that. Like I said, it's just a day to do nothing. If you have certain pains that, at the moment,
right,
and you decide to do a stretch to work that area or get a massage, rub that area, or even if you get like a cream to put in that area on the Sabbath day, I'm not going to say that is wrong. But in terms of any type of exercise regimen or stretching regimen or just going in a massage chair to relax, then I would say those are not good for the Sabbath day.
All right. What scripture in the book of Ezekiel leaves no room for Roman Messiah replacement?
That will probably be Ezekiel chapter 18, where it says everyone dies for their own sin. Well, that entire chapter is speaking about we all die for our own sin.
Do you agree with the New Testament claim that says the Shabbat was made for man's benefit, not for the Shabbat? Not man for the Shabbat. Mark chapter 2, verse 27.
God himself didn't, he just tells us to keep the Sabbath day. And the first Sabbath day, he told us what was done. So in regards to, that's an age-old question, what is for God's benefit or man's benefit. But when you think about the Torah overall or the commandments of God, they are for the benefit of man because that's how we live. God says when we read in Leviticus chapter 18 that if we keep his commandments and statutes, that we will live by them. And it's repeated in Leviticus chapter 20. So the Torah overall, or the commandments, statutes, and judgments of God overall, are for the benefit of man, so to speak. But in terms of the Sabbath specifically, God didn't say, whether it was for his benefit or for our benefit. It's just something that he did by ceasing from work after creation, and it's something that he commanded us to do to commemorate that creation.
Hallelujah. Things they don't discuss in church. Doesn't the suffering servant Israel dies for the sins of the nations, Isaiah 53? They ask for a scripture in Ezekiel.
And for that one, the answer is no. And I know we did in detail go through Isaiah 53 to explain why. It's not, the concept of a suffering servant is actually something that's not written in Isaiah chapter 53 specifically. That's a term that came about, later on. But even in Isaiah chapter 53, that term suffering servant or a servant, dying for anybody else's sins does not occur within that chapter.